Ever made plaster mold before? You did? Well, I know you are an expert. I don't even know why you're here. You can probably do this better than we can. So we're going to show you how to make two different kinds of plaster molds today. One is going to be a pour mold, a two-part pour mold. It's very solid. It's kind of bulky, and it's great for doing things like slip casting of porcelain, or really for any kind of mold making procedures. We're going to be pouring a flexible foam into it, so we can show you guys not only how to make the mold, but then actually to use a more interesting material, so that this stuff actually, it's cool. It ends up like the consistency, like a Nerf ball, like a squishy, flexible foam.
And it's a product made by a company called Symons, which is a company that generally makes like art-friendly plastics and products like that. They're usually 1-to-1 mix ratio, super simple to use, and you can make plastic and rubber and like a lot of things that you wouldn't ordinarily think as being like something we have access to. It's an easy company for that.
What was the name?
Smooth On.
Yeah, it's you can get a bunch of their products at Pearl or Utrecht. This is kind of what it looks like. There's also like a two-part plastic that's really pretty user-friendly. It's just 1-to-1 mix, and then in about 5 minutes you have a perfect plastic little critter coming out of your
A couple
mold.
things you guys want to remember though whenever you're using the products is that they are toxic. Thank you. So you do want to wear gloves and be in a well-ventilated area, and if you wear gloves, they should be nitrile gloves.
So that's the first kind of mold we're going to show you. We're going to make a two-part mold of this little guy. See of Lisa. And the second kind of plaster mold we're going to show you how to make is a waste mold. This is really great if you're going to just make one quick product, and it doesn't matter if you reuse the mold afterwards. So we're gonna make a waste mold of this bear head here, and actually this is going to be a 3-part mold. You can see already when it was cast the first time, it has this parting line here down the middle, and then also this parting line under the chin. And that's so that the pieces will pull away from our original, and they'll also pull away from our casting once we make it. If we were to just cast this in 2 parts, the way we're going to do this little guy, what would happen is the original would stick. And then, basically it would get locked into place in these areas like the eye and in the nose. So whenever you're considering how you're going to make your mold, you have to think about your parting lines. That's really important.
On a lot of the, actually, if you start noticing parting lines, on a lot of the cheap toys, not that this is a cheap toy, I'm sure it's very nice, but you'll notice that they actually have parting lines already on them, and those are the parting lines for the actual object. And one thing to remember is the parting line is not always just the middle line, it's the point at which the form, it's the outermost point of the form. And one way you can get at it is to stare at the model from directly above, and just try to find that line all the way around the object where it's going the absolute furthest out point.
Basically it's silhouette if you're looking at it down like that. And so then the third kind of mold that we're going to show you, I think is probably going to be your favorite one. It's an alginate mold. It's really great for life casting. And it's super easy, and the materials are available locally and online. So within just a few minutes you can get a perfect copy of your hand. I'll pass this around so you can see, but you'll get all the wrinkles, all the pores in your skin. It's all skin safe, nothing is toxic about it. And then you can go on, once you have your plaster hand cast into the alginate, we're not going to show you how to make rubber mold today, but you could essentially use another Smooth On product to just make a simple rubber mold. This is actually the mold that hand came out of. I'll pass that around as well.
It's not a great mold, but it was the only one we had in the shop right now. So the reason we can't show you the rubber molds right now is because the rubber takes about 24 hours to cure. So we pour in the material, but you don't really see half the process. So we're sticking with plaster and alginate because they're fairly quick to generate.
So, all right. Ben, did you say you had some clay that we could use?
I sure did.
Can we have some? All right. So, what we're gonna do with our first mold is to set up some coddles. These are you can make these yourself. They're just boards with a little extra piece on there for clamping. And what's really great about these is that you can kind of put them together in any configuration. Thank you.
They're always tough to figure out the right configuration.
There you go. You can put these together in any kind of configuration you want to, and then clamp them together so that they're just the right size for your figure, and you're not going to waste a lot of material. So
I just made these this morning too out of scrap. They're really super simple to make.
If anybody wants to get closer, you can come up behind them, move a chair or there's space behind them.
yeah, we're going to be mainly working down in this area, so you feel free to just gather around.
But yeah, you are further out. There's lots of space behind them if you want to go up there.
Deep in there, but that's all right. Yeah, we can just kind of build it up a little bit.
Maybe we can go around maybe six square. Build a frame from the shelving and then just finish up, pound it back together and put it back. You know what I mean?
Okay. Our coddles are a little deep for this guy, so we're just gonna wait, what are you saying we're doing?
We're gonna draw a square, take the cones away, surround the parting line with clay, put the cones back in, finish it out.
Okay, that'll make it easier to see too.
Alright. Well, if I can draw a line. Cool. So we're muttering to ourselves. We do that a lot. So what we're gonna do is basically we're gonna have this handsome devil lay out on the table. And what I like to do is just very carefully kind of trace out the parting line all the way around and try to get it to the point where the pen tip is pretty much fading out. You know what I mean? Like, so you're right on that silhouette.
And then this is just a regular water-based clay that you can get anywhere. You guys have a ton of it here. And plaster doesn't stick to clay, so it's a really great thing to use for building up that parting line so that you have a halfway point all the way around your model. You can actually use the water-based clay as a mold-making material in itself also if you just want a one-piece mold. Actually, where'd Steven go?
You're right.
There you are. Can I see your baby doll head one more time? While he's doing that, I'll show you this. So if you just give yourself kind of a flat piece of clay to start out with. And then you can just make a really simple press mold. The plaster kind of absorbs the moisture from the clay, and it acts like a natural molding, a mold release. So I didn't really push that in deep enough. You can start to see like the nose and the mouth. I'm gonna do that again. The head's kind of squishy. This is really better to do when you have like a really hard object. Actually, let's try it with this little angel's head.
He'll talk.
Okay, so I just kind of squished her head in there.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Alright, that kind of stuck to her a little bit. That's alright.
Yeah. Her face.
Yeah.
We're gonna blame the clay. But okay, while you're playing with that,
Yeah,
I'll
go ahead.
finish on this. Okay, so you can see we got this guy's parting line drawn on there, and you can also see that the parting line is not like a straight line all the way down the object. It has to follow those outer silhouette. So you can see that the clay we're going to have to build up is not going to be like a flat surface. It's going to be a very undulating surface. So where did that clay go?
Right here.
You can also use a type of oil-based clay called plasticine, which is nice if you don't use too much clay. It doesn't dry out like regular clay does. It's an oil-based clay, so it stays liquid forever, or squishy forever, not liquid, I guess. But,
Well, it has, when you're using the plasticine though, the oil-based clay, it's good for plaster, but you have to be careful with it with certain other materials because a lot of times it'll have sulfur added to it. So that will react poorly with certain rubbers and epoxies, and it'll make them not cure. So if you are using plasticine, make sure that you get the sulfur-free stuff, even though it's a little more expensive. Oh, she's sticking it so much.
Clay's not too soft.
Yeah, it's better with a little softer clay, but it's okay. I know, right?
Probably put like a oil on it, right?
Or we could use garage on it or some powder.
Yeah, maybe like a...
You want some powder?
Well, I don't know, like what kind of powder?
That's what we use sometimes. We put some in the garage.
Okay, yeah, let's give that a shot. Why not?
it's always the simple things that mess you up, you know?
A little bigger here. All right, let's do that. Yeah. I'm getting some.
Plus that clay's really hard.
Yeah, that worked. Okay, good. So now we could just like pour some plaster over that, and that would take the impression. So that's like a really just simple kind of one-part mold. It's very imprecise though, and you only ever have just a very shallow kind of bas relief.
They use a process like that for sand casting glass. So a lot of the sand cast glass, just push it right down into the sand and then pour them with the glass on top, which is fun. Playing with
So I'm gonna squish this though so that we can use it over here for this one. And can we have a little bit more clay also? I'm gonna need some for the top of your head as well. Right.
The nice thing about plaster is not only can you use it for slip casting ceramics, slip casting is also the same process they use for making doll parts. So they sell a doll maker's latex, and that works with a plaster mold as well, where you just, slip casting is a process where you just pour in the liquid. The plaster, because it's so porous and dry, sucks the water out of it, leaving only the solids behind. So in the case of ceramics, you end up with just a nice shell of clay. And also in the case of latex, you just end up with a nice latex shell. So you can then pop it off and you end up with a nice casting latex.
Yeah, actually I have a latex mold here of a baby doll head that I can pass around so you can see what that's like. It's really, really flexible. So you would want to use what's called a mother mold with something like that. And a mother mold is just going to basically hold it in place, like a candy shell. But with that particular mold, what I like to do is actually use the flexible properties of it to change the shape of the face for when I pour into it.
Is that a doll?
That's a doll. Do you remember Catter Baby from my talk last night? That's actually Catter Baby's head.
Thank you.
So what I'm trying to do now is just get this parting a little smooth out.
Need some water?
And you can spend quite a bit of time making a perfect mold. And, you know, obviously the more time you spend on something, the better it turns out. To a point.
Yeah, these are kind of down and dirty molds, but we figured this was going to be the way that you would want to take most of your molds. Just pretty quick, pretty easy, and you know, it'll get the job done.
Well, that's really what.
So you're smoothing the clay up to where you drew the marker line?
Yeah, I'm smoothing the clay up to where I drew the marker line. And what I'm going to do is once I have this sort of rough area built in, I'm going to put the cottles back in place. So I can then create the parting line for the two halves of the mold. Now, move my hands a little.
So that will be the top portion you're molding now.
This will be the midsection of the mold right now. So this
Okay.
plane is going to be sort of where the two halves of the mold meet.
Okay.
Yeah, we're just going to pour the plaster directly on top of that, and then flip the whole thing upside down, take off our clay, and pour a second
So you
portion
can
of
see
plaster
it's
on
okay,
top of
okay,
that.
okay.
Sort of stuck inside of the material right now. So,
You are blocking the bottom portion.
yes, yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly. So I'm going to reassemble the cottles.
So while he's doing that, I'm going to start building up our parting line for our waist mold on the bear. It's pretty much doing the exact same thing, except we're not using the cottles this time. This can be a better way of molding things that are larger or multi-part. I've cast several mannequins in this kind of style, and if you want to make your mold stronger, you can just add burlap to it.
Is that clay or which one is it?
Originally, this would have been clay, yeah, and you could kind of see the marks of the original tools.
Real, yeah.
This is actually a research mannequin. It's designed to go inside of a taxidermy form. So for people that hunt, this is what would go inside their bearskin rug.
So you bought that's this.
Yeah, you can buy this stuff online. There's a company called Research Mannequins. There's a Van Dyke's Taxidermy, and you can get, you know, full-scale animals in any kind of position. Really, any kind of animal.
That's nice.
It is. It's kind of, you know, if you like work with foam animals.
You said research mannequins.
Research Mannequins and Van Dyke's Taxidermy Supply.
Yeah. Your neighbors may think you're weird when you start to get taxidermy supplies going to your house.
I know they have an alligator next door, you know, plastic alligator, big life-size.
Peter, what are you doing inside of there?
So what I'm doing now is I'm continuing that plane that I've started from the parting line and sort of extending that outward to get a nice flat bottom to cast my plaster against.
And you guys can come and peek inside of there.
So you have to seal off the edges so it doesn't seep out of the...
Yeah, I always
box?
seal up the edges, so I use the clay like kind of like a caulking, and I just seal up the edges of the box. And what I'm going to do as I'm building it up is I'm going to key the mold together. One of the things you want to be careful of is you want to have the two parts of your mold come back together in a very controlled way. So we do that by keying the mold. It's
Oh, don't forget to give it a place to pour into.
Yeah.
Where are you pouring?
probably
Okay. One important thing to keep in mind when you're making any mold is how you're going to get your casting material into that mold afterwards. So if we have this guy just kind of locked in two halves, then how are you going to get the mold in there? You can't. So you have to always give it like a kind of cup going to the outside edge that you'll be able to use as a kind of funnel to pour your plaster or plastic or whatever it is you're going to be casting it into. So you can see with the beer head, I'm doing basically the same thing, just along the parting lines, just building up that edge. And I'm only gonna cast this one section at a time. So even though this is gonna be a 3-part mold, I'm just gonna start with the first part and then build up the second part from there and then do the third part.
So mold making can actually, well, as you guys can imagine, the more complicated your molds get, the harder they become to build. And
You remember that mold we had to make for Michael Jew of the antlers?
yeah, we had
You
to
did for
cast what was it, elk antlers, which
Full, huge, like a whole rack of elk antlers. And they got so thin and so narrow, and it was so many parts. And it was the hardest mold. It was the hardest mold I've ever tried to
well,
make.
the Richard Prince nurse hat chair was another hard mold. It's that thing.
Do you ever work with wax mold then?
Yeah, you can actually cast wax into a lot of different materials. You mean
Then
casting
can,
wax?
and then you can alter it afterwards and do things.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
cast and that sort of-
When you cast wax into plaster, it's a good idea to soak the plaster in water overnight to let it become fully saturated with water. It helps it release from the mold. Generally, we don't use wax too much in our practice, but it is a very common material.
You get
to
more
use.
details into that.
You'd be surprised. You can actually get a lot of details out of a lot of different materials. So even this plaster hand is somewhere. You know, it picked up all the fingerprints. It can, like the amount of detail you can pick up is actually very surprising. Even in a material like concrete, I've cast in before, and like the proper mix of concrete, you can get tons of detail. So, yeah. So, yeah.
How many pieces would you say that antler mold consisted of?
It was,
I think it was an 8-part plaster mold and a 2-part rubber mold.
no, it was more than that. I think it was a 13-part plaster mold. It was intense.
Yeah. But once you start to get into more complicated forms, you're definitely going to have to start getting into rubbers, just because, well, you don't have to get into rubbers, but the amount of time building a plaster mold would take you would be so long. And actually, a lot of the early molds were obviously all plaster, and rubber's a thing that's come about fairly recently. So when you go to when you see old castings of like Grecian statues, and you realize that those things were all like 100-part plaster molds, they're very cool to look at.
They use rubber, or what did they use?
They use plaster.
They use plaster.
To make the mold? Oh.
Yeah, so you can make a mold of anything, really. It doesn't matter how complicated it is. In plaster, you just have to have more and more parts.
Yeah, which, it's...
Because the more undercuts you have, the more places it can get locked in. And that's why rubber is so great to use these days, because then you don't have to worry as much about those undercuts. You can have slight ones, like in the nostril here, or in the eye, and they'll just, the material's rubbery, so it's going to kind of spring off of there.
Maybe that's why the Romans broke up the Greeks' marble, so that they could cast it.
That could be why, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of the things you do have to break them up to cast.
I was always wondering why there was always in pieces and destroyed them all. But maybe it was to make casts of it.
Also, when you do stone sculpture, it is helpful to have the arm as a separate piece of stone in the body so you can assemble them later. And I know that a lot of times in the Roman sculptures they left, especially when they were sculpting the Caesars, they would leave the heads detachable, so when one died they could pop the head off and replace it with another one.
They did that?
Ancient Photoshop.
Yeah, right? I guess every Caesar wants to have big muscles and what they want, wearing armor. They all want to look the same.
Yes, we saw that with mosaics at Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. The empress had 3 different husbands at different times. As one died, she got rid of the head and put in another head.
That's right.
That's right. Don't grieve.
I know the tour guide
She may have
wasn't
been-
clear on that.
Instrumental in getting rid of the husbands you never know.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
It's an early form of divorce.
Just kill 'em.
Yeah, but it's funny. I think mold making is actually going to be quickly replaced by the digital technologies.
Oh, yeah, the 3D printing, yeah.
3D printing and scanning, it's going to quickly,
And they were even talking about you can shop online and get it printed at home.
yeah.
You can.
Certain things,
Yeah, you have through Shapeways.
yeah.
But I mean, just the cost of a 3D printer now is down so much. You can
Plus
get one
it
for
is
$500-$600.
toxic,
Yeah, it's so toxic though.
Is it?
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
they shouldn't be in the same room when it's printed.
So dangerous.
At this point in time.
Yeah, I always wonder how this stuff is for the environment, because it's like made out of plastics, right? Like,
Yeah, and it's
there's-
really, really toxic. But you see when they do it in a plant, they have it boxed in and they have exhaust fans and everything.
Yeah.
You're putting it in your kitchen table? Yeah.
I hope they find a way to like incorporate recycling into the materials.
They use a lot of the recycled
Yeah.
plastic. That's a good part.
Because that's starting to spread like wildfire, yeah.
Yeah. Because in order to get it to stick, they have to use a lot of toxic material. But yeah, I'm sure you're right. That's probably going to be the next thing.
Well, 3D scanning keeps getting cheaper. You can get a 3D scanner now for about $3,000, which will give you full definition scans of objects.
You can make your own ones off of YouTube though.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah, you can. And I mean, really, anybody that has like a smartphone can make a 3D object just through, there's a site called
123D Make.
Yeah, 123D Make. And
That's-
if you just take like maybe 25 or 30 photographs around an object, then you plug these photographs into their program, you just upload them, and then it comes back to you as this fully formed three-dimensional object. It's pretty amazing, and then you could just hit print on a 3D printer and print that thing out.
I think there's an app for that too.
It's free, yeah, it's totally free. You can do it on your phone or on your laptop.
Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. You know, we have to take advantage of technology. As artists, I think it's important that we.
Yeah, I've
So
done
it's out
wood
there.
carving, and they have a Sears now sells a small little machine, 1,500 bucks. You just put the wood in, and it comes out the carved.
Yeah,
3D program.
it's CNC router.
Yeah, my uncle's got one of them, the big one.
Oh yeah, they're a big one.
Cam 8000.
More competition for the artist.
But those are expensive. This one is like
Yeah, it's like $100,000.
But, I mean, artists can use that stuff too.
Oh, granted, I'm not saying no.
There's a company.
But for use, like actually using your hands, you mean?
No, for dumbing down the marketplace.
Which, you know,
Everybody can do such magic now that the bar is raised for the artist.
I guess it has to be. I mean, really what it does is that it ups the concept, right? You have to actually think about why you're using your machines and your materials in a way that, you know, in older times you really didn't have to think of it. You know, you'd make an oil painting or you'd make a plaster casting. But now that anybody can make anything, you have to think, why would I make that?
It's possible to use a 3D printer with clay and fire it in ceramic.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
even-
true.
Even that advancement's been made.
You know, actually, they're even using 3D printers now to print stem cells. And did you see the thing about the mouse heart? They printed a mouse heart, hooked it up to electrodes, and it beat.
No, they've done human organs.
Have they done that now?
Yeah. With 3D printing.
And so they've got they can also print titanium, so.
Basically, we're all gonna live forever.
That's what I'm hoping for.
Right?
Or at least some clone of this.
I'm good. Let me do my 70 years.
You know, it's going to the war on food. Be
Okay,
here and
so, what do you think? Actually, brush would be perfect.
Yeah, sure. Use a brush. I kind of want a sponge too. Ben, do you have like a little sponge for clay working?
There's a bucket back there.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Perfect, thank you. No, that's just what I mean.
So this guy got a little bit, then I'm gonna add in key stuff.
Yeah, it's really important when you're making a mold to have a way that it's going to lock back together and not slip and get misaligned. So that's what he's going to do now. And putting in a key can be just as simple as like pushing down, you know, like the end of your tool in, and that's just going to give you a nice little notch so your molds go chunk and fit right together.
Exactly how I was gonna do it. Took my grand finale oil.
Sorry, man.
Just gotta clean off this guy. She doesn't get too
You
dirty.
guys tell her married?
Yeah, because the cleaner he is, you know, the more detail you pick up. Because you'd be surprised, the plaster actually picks up almost every detail. It's very little. Like the, very nice. Oh, I forgot to clean up his neck.
Do you want to use a sponge?
No, I mean like
Get rid of that.
Oh yeah, okay, so because his head was originally molded separately from the body, it has that gap in there, and our plaster would get stuck in there otherwise, so he's just gonna put a little extra clay around that band.
Like a plug?
Yeah, like a plug.
yeah, just like a cool necklace for him. You know, it's swag.
Do you mind taking a picture? Of course. He's happy.
Little shoulder here. There we go. So now, and I could spend, when we worked at KB Projects, this would be far too rough a texture between our molds, so I would have to spend the next week and a half smoothing this thing out.
But this is really all needed.
When you do this, you only have to do the one part in the clay. The next time you have
The
to...
next time you cast right against the piece of plaster.
Yeah.
So let's find some. I need this guy. I guess everybody can.
People sign in if they haven't yet, and then I'll like have the council and my coordinator that you this side already.
I don't know if we said it already, but the cool thing about using water clay is it's like a natural mold release almost for plaster. So plaster will always never stick to water clay.
Except today.
Except today.
Except
yeah.
today, yeah, because we're showing you.
What are you making now?
So I'm making a waist mold here. And to put the keys in, I'm just using this along the edge.
Why is it called a waist mold?
Because I'm not going to have any real structure to it other than the plaster. So then if I needed to say pour, if I only need to use it once, then this would be a really easy way to make a quick mold in multiple parts that I could then just kind of break off afterwards. This one would be much harder to break because it's going to be so thick and so dense.
And so you could reuse it?
So this one you'll be able to reuse. This one you could maybe use a couple of times, but if you only need one of something, it's so easy. You make just kind of like a 1 to 1.5 inch shell around each of the different parts, stick it together, and then you pour in your concrete or whatever you're going to use, and then just chip it off afterwards.
Yeah. But we all want more of this can and all waters, so we're gonna make sure we can print a bunch of them.
Okay, do you guys want to see what this looks like before we pour in the plaster?
I gotta release it, though.
Peter, what do you mean by you have to release it?
We never. Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's
I
a
don't know
great
anything
question.
about it. I don't know anything
Fantastic question.
What was the question?
What does she mean by I have to release it first? Whenever you cast against something, you always want to make sure what you're casting does not stick to what you're casting it against. So in order to do that, you say you've got to release it. There's a bunch of different release agents you can use. They do sell.
Wait.
They do sell.
View the body. It's a viewing.
See,
They do sell a few different release agents. There's Man Ease, and then there's Smooth On Mold Release. They both work great. The nice thing about using these things is that they don't react chemically with other things. So if you're using a product like a silicone, which is an amazing rubber, they last a very long time, and they're pretty non-toxic. The only issue is they're really sensitive to chemicals. So you'd have to use one of these release agents. In a pinch, you can use any sort of greasy thing you want.
Like vegetable oil or something,
Vegetable
right?
oil works fine. I've used pan before in a pinch.
beeswax.
Beeswax, yeah, nothing will stick to beeswax. The only trouble is how do you get the beeswax to coat something else. Vaseline works great and for pretty much most everything. But these will give you a better surface than most other things.
What's the one name?
There's mayonnaise and Smooth On Mold Release. They have fun names. Another product we do use, kind of like the beeswax, is paste wax. So like bowling alley wax, whenever we cast a plaster mold, we're going to use that to help condition the mold before we go for it.
Do you want to take this outside to spray it?
How do you make it on?
About moving it?
Yeah.
I think it'll be okay. Let's just,
You gonna help me?
if you can just get the door.
I gotta come a little drier first, actually.
Oh, there's too much liquid in
I
there?
actually want to try that with these edges.
Okay, there's one.
So the mold releases tend to be a little more expensive, but they're totally worth it because they'll give you a much better product in the end. Obviously, you don't want to breathe what's coming out of this can, so you leave that outside.
For just a quick and easy mold release though, if it's the middle of the night, just go to CVS and get some Vaseline. That always works just fine.
That would be less toxic, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because you're not going to breathe it. I mean, it's still a petroleum product, but
So
you know,
that's
it's
toxic
fine.
to little, but that's toxic to people.
No, I mean, really, this isn't toxic at all. In this, you just don't want to breathe it because you just don't want silicone in your lungs, which is essentially what that is. Yeah, the reason you wouldn't want to use Vaseline, though, is because it's kind of thick, and when you brush it on, it can leave that texture there. So that's why this stuff is so great, because you're really not going to end up with any kind of a texture. Did you want the Vaseline for the wood parts?
I'll bring it back in and Vaseline inside.
All right. So I'm just gonna spray this guy outside too. Probably this wouldn't stick because it's really not very porous. It's got kind of a slick surface, but just to be on the safe side, it's you know, you don't want your plaster to stick to what you're casting, so you pretty much always want to mold release it. Sorry.
Vaseline is great. Nothing sticks to Vaseline. So whenever I'm doing some quick work.
Yeah.
Especially for like the sides of this coddle. Whenever you're working with the coddle, you want to always carry around like a couple extra blobs of clay with you, because you don't want to all of a sudden find a leak in the coddle. So I'm burning up the bathroom.
How do you spell coddle? Is it C-O-D-D?
Yeah, L-E.
So if you were doing a sculpture, like a clay sculpture that you want to make a mold of, you would sort of do the similar, breaking it down to parts?
Yeah, you could, but you wouldn't have to mold release it.
Yeah.
You don't really have
Clay.
to mold release the clay at all, because the clay's
Plastic
not gonna
doesn't stick
stick.
to clay. Actually,
After it's fired, or only when it's
after it's fired, no good.
You
But
have
would
to
definitely have to
That's,
release it.
yeah, that's how I
But
wanted, I didn't know if you're
unfired
talking about sculptures that are already fired.
Already
Oh,
fired.
yeah.
Okay.
That I have, I'd like to make a copy.
What about plastering? Do you still have plastering?
No,
Not really, no.
You might end up with, picking off a lot of plaster for plaster.
Yeah, it'll stain the plaster a little bit.
I think I'm good to go.
Alright. And I am too. So I got you this bucket of water.
Okay, do you guys know how to mix up plaster? Mixing up plaster is fun.
It's right here.
Right there. I like to wear gloves when I mix up plaster because it's so drying on your hands and does not feel good.
Let's just leave that out.
These blue gloves I would recommend when you buy a box of gloves, make sure.
And these nitrile ones, they sell them at Home Depot.
Get the nitrile ones, don't get the latex ones. Latex ones are actually, chemicals can pass through them. So like, they're not totally impermeable. So solvents can pass through them and they can affect these. But the nitrile gloves, they're more chemically resistant. It's
The latex are not that really resistant.
they're great for, I like to use latex for like mixing up plaster because it's a little less expensive. But for any time you're working with chemicals, I don't use latex. I use nitrile.
Resins, plastics, rubbers.
Which is, nobody tells you that. Everybody says the latex will work fine, but latex is no good.
So this is just a mold making plaster, a casting plaster. Plaster comes in different hardnesses. The kind that you get in the, you can just pour it in here, it's the extra water. The kind that you can get at Home Depot works okay, but it's a little bit softer. It's in the paint department.
I don't use that stuff. That stuff's junk.
Otherwise, you can go to like Michael's or Pearl or Utrecht and just get a standard casting plaster.
If you're in the Fort Lauderdale area, there's this store called G Pro, spelled P-R-O-U-L-X. I don't know why. But they sell 100-pound bags of something called Hydrocal, which is a very pure plaster, and it's like $30 for 100 pounds, so, or 50 pounds or something. It's a big bag for very inexpensive.
It's cheaper than Pearl.
Way cheap.
It is cheaper.
And what are they called again?
G Pro, so it's G.P-R-O-U-L-S.
One of the biggest problems about buying plaster in Florida, however, is the humidity. It will absorb the moisture from the air, and then you can end up with like little hard rocks in your plaster. So, depending on how old it is, you might want to sift it first. You can just put it through like a flour sifter. I mean, this stuff is essentially baking, right? This is flour, this is water. But you do want to kind of get those lumps out if it has any.
Especially after it's been opened.
Especially after it's been opened.
Yeah, once it's been, we like to keep our plaster in like a Tupperware thing, just to help keep the water out of it. And plaster, if it's over like a year old, chances are, if it's been sitting around in your studio for a year, chances are it's no good anymore. So, and the stuff they sell at the Home Depot is almost always just trashed.
junk, yeah. This stuff is actually pretty pilly, but should be okay.
How about wearing a mask?
It would be a really good idea for us to be wearing a mask right now.
Well,
Do you want some?
Yeah, there's some right over there, actually.
We have.
if you're using a lot of plaster and you're just like really dumping it and you have clouds of it, sure, that's a big problem. If you're just making a little mold, it's okay.
So whenever I fill up water to mix plaster with, the best is like room temperature water. So the water that comes out of our taps right now is perfect. Up north, you gotta add a little hot water to it. But also, you only want to fill up a bucket about a third of the way, because it's usually about equal parts plaster and water, approximately, to mix up a batch. So I usually fill up a bucket a third of the way so I can reach in and mix it up.
Did you want to
Sure, why not? You guys want to hear secret stuff about masks?
Yeah. They don't do anything.
Actually, some masks do stuff. If your masks, OSHA, which is the whatever it stands for, grades masks, and if they're graded N95 by OSHA, it means they're going to do stuff. Sorry, I totally jumped in there. Yeah, these masks are these are called, these are what you'd call, sorry, I'm going to make fun of masks. These masks are actually called like comfort masks.
I want to do that.
Thank you. So what I would recommend you do is they're like 50 cents more expensive. I would recommend everybody get an N95 mask.
Rare one with filters.
Yeah, or you can get a respirator. But the N95, you know, they're
Because these leak on the side.
Yeah.
And when you're mixing plaster, which I've done, you get so much through the side
Yeah.
of it. It's good.
So Peter and I are both going to mix up a batch of plaster here, but for his mold, he's just going to pour it in, and for mine, I'm going to brush on a detail layer. And then I'm actually going to brush on several more layers to build up the surface of the waste mold.
So whenever I mix plaster into water, I do it like one handful at a time, and I gently kind of just let it kind of work it through my fingers, and that helps get out any bubbles or any pills, and it also, if I find a spot that's already, you know, kind of like one of those chunks right there, I can get rid of that. And there are instructions online for exactly the weight ratio to from plaster to water, but I don't know anybody who keeps a scale on them.
So you're making
So-
sure not to get your fingers wet, right? 'Cause
Yeah,
you
you
can't tell
definitely don't
from
want to
here
get
what you're
your
doing.
fingers wet. But you know, the closer I keep my hand to the water, the less dust there is rising in the air.
Plaster is really forgiving, actually, in its mixing ratio. You can mix it a little bit thin if you want a slower set, or a little bit thick if you want a faster set, or if you have the water warmer, it'll also give you a faster set. But what we're trying to do is just get the level of the plaster right below the level of the water. And you can see when that happens because you'll start to get little islands that form right in the center of your plaster there. So once you have islands that don't settle anymore, that's when you know you have enough plaster.
Which
Should mix up to about the consistency of between heavy cream and pancake batter.
it's actually just like cooking. Actually, if you guys, and you can, it's actually really cool the way it looks as it's starting to get closer to it.
Yeah, you
It's
might want to come
almost
over
there.
here and see, especially in Peter's because his bucket is a little bit bigger.
Kind of stops sinking, right? Like it
It's
makes peaks.
It's not sinking, but a lot of times when people are new to mixing plaster, they'll just
So
add
it
too
has
much
little islands
plaster
at first, and then
at the beginning. But
and that's what's happening over there.
hold on, let's see. Okay, check it out. This is where it's good to see. Don't look at the dry plaster, but see how there's that little wet plaster right under the surface there? That's sort of the second layer of plaster, which is what you really want to pay attention to. So I'm going to add a little bit more so that I get these islands in there that are just poking up above the surface. And that's when the plaster is totally, that's when you have a good saturation of plaster. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So you can see like these little islands.
So since he's pouring his, he's going to mix his a little bit thinner. But since I'm going to brush mine on, I'm making mine a little bit thicker.
I know a lot of people with like rules as far as plaster goes, where they'll say once you've got those islands, you have to wait 30 seconds. You can see right there. It's actually, once you've got the islands, you got to wait about 30 seconds, and then you can mix it up. But as far as I know, that's just superstition. But I do it anyway.
Did you really?
Kind of. Yeah.
That's what Georgi did. He said it gave him like a slower set. One of the wonderful things about working with plaster is that you can continue working with it all the way up to the point where it sets. And actually, it's going to set gradually. So it'll just continue to get thicker and thicker.
But you don't want to agitate it before you really saturate it, right? Because then you start activating.
You know, I find that actually the reason you don't want to do that is not so much that it'll speed up the set time, but it'll make it harder to see when you have those like islands forming underneath the first layer. So I think that's why people are told not to do that, more so than it'll affect the set time of the plaster. Because it is a chemical reaction and it's going to react. It's just, you know, having the appropriate amount in will keep it from turning into sludge and turning into really brittle.
So Leah, you mixed yours with your hand and...
Yeah, I just mixed it with my hand until all the lumps came out. And now I'm brushing on this detail layer. Just trying to make sure that I get it into all the cracks and crevices so that I don't end up with air bubbles in there.
Air bubbles are like the worst thing in the world when you're mold making. They're not the worst thing in the world.
But you'll see
The worst thing in
them.
the world is when the thing sticks together and doesn't come apart. But air bubbles are like the second worst thing.
So how long do you usually have before it's going to be too hard to like brush on or pour?
15 minutes.
Well, at kind of the most. I mean, with this stuff, I mix it so thick here that this is going to start setting
Yeah, it looks
much
like it's
quicker.
already hardening a little bit.
If it starts to get too hard, you can add a little bit more water. It's kind of a trick of the trade. But you don't really want to do that more than once, and it can weaken your set.
Yeah, it's actually...
So Leah, when do you put the burlap if you want to use burlap? You put it now?
No, because this is just the detail layer. So I really don't want anything to happen to my model. If I were to press the burlap in now, I might get some of that texture of the burlap kind of pressing through into the skin of this. So this is going to be kind of my protective layer here. I like to add the burlap after I brushed on 2 layers.
Okay.
If I'm going to use it. And in fact, using burlap along with this kind of waste mold will make it into a mold that's really not so easy to waste. So if you want to be able to break up your mold afterwards, don't use burlap. But
Yeah, you'll have a nightmare.
you'll have a nightmare getting it apart. But if you want to reuse it a couple of times, adding a layer of burlap that you can just get, you know, at the fabric store will significantly increase the strength of your mold.
I mixed up a little too little plaster, so I gotta mix up a little bit more. So I'm gonna do that real quick. Once you pour in the plaster though, it's always a good idea to dip your cottons
It's just like making
and
cake. It's just like
to help
making it.
release the air bubbles.
But it always seals to itself, right? Like even if it's somewhat dry? Or?
It'll be like a fault line in it, but I'm gonna mix it up and add it wet, so it should be fine.
And even if you add it dry, it's pretty much gonna stick.
Yeah, it does stick very well.
So my clay just fell off over here.
Oh, you need something for underneath? Or?
Yeah. Let's see.
There's a chunk of clay there
Yeah,
you could kind of
clay.
set under there.
You know, it's like stuff happens when you're working. Nothing's ever perfect.
You do that on purpose just to show what to do.
Thank you.
It also happened on this side.
Okay, yeah, I'll put it over there.
How do you know what level you want to fill the?
Generally, I want to fill it up to about a ½ inch above the piece. If you're doing something like slip casting, it tends to be a little more particular because it's got to dry evenly. I don't know that much about slip casting, but you can ask somebody else in there.
Oh, Dan would know.
Mainly that guy right there.
So you know you've reached half an inch out?
You could draw on a mark, but you could draw on a mark and try to get it very close. On your cobble, it's just your wooden cobble. But I'm just kind of eyeballing it, just guessing enough. Another thing you want to keep track of when you're working with the cobble is you always want to keep a little ball of clay next to you, because it's always bad news when the cobble springs a leak.
As you can see, clay is very useful. There are so many things that can just kind of randomly go wrong when you're mold making, but most of them you can actually fix.
Yeah.
Do you have a special sink that you put clay water down?
Those are all.
They all have a stopper? Okay.
It's ceramics room, so.
Surprised you guys just don't dump it in the grass outside.
The plaster water would do it.
So I think Florida dirt needs more clay, right? Is that something you had to do right here? No? I'm wrong.
Don't suggest that.
I just
Well, they'd probably get upset at us if they see students dumping a lot of stuff outside.
Yeah, there would be a lot of clay outside. That would be bad news.
I'm always hoping they're not looking when I have students dumping the plaster out there.
There's no other way to get
There's
plaster
no,
water.
yeah, because if you guys didn't know, you don't want to put plaster down a drain, or it will completely plug up the drain.
Yes.
So pour it down in the drain outside? Yeah.
Just in the grass, like,
Yes.
Well, plaster comes from nature.
It's
mine. So does everything else.
Must be some sort of ceremonial.
Right. It's ceremonial value.
Yeah, you never want to dump plaster down the sink because it will harden in the pipes. So I like to have just a bucket of water when I'm working so I can rinse my brushes off in that or my hands off in that.
Yeah, we actually also keep like a hand washing bucket for the plaster and just wash our hands right through it.
Yeah.
So I would also wear gloves just because it's no fun to get your hands covered in plaster. It sticks to all your hair and it's just it's horrible.
But so this brush right now, it looks like it's ruined, but actually it's not. I'm just gonna rinse that right out and I can use it again.
It's like shampoo. Sorry, I'm gonna make jokes.
I appreciate that. Definitely do that.
Alright, so we've got this half done, and we're just going to let it sit for a while. Plaster's really kind of cool. It goes through a chemical reaction when it dries, and so you'll actually feel it'll start to heat up, and it'll heat up. And once it actually heats up, it'll cool down again. Once it's done heating up, it's actually finished the chemical reaction, and it's safe to demold it. Plaster will still have water inside of it, so if you're doing something like slip casting latex or slip casting porcelain, I don't know if you guys slip cast porcelain. You guys slip cast porcelain?
We work a little bit with porcelain, there's no slip casting.
Okay. If you do any sort of casting that's very dependent upon the relative dryness of the plaster, then you're going to have to wait till all the water evaporates out of it. And you can always feel when plaster still has water inside of it, because when you touch it, it'll be cold. When you touch plaster and it's like room temperature, it means there's no water inside of it, because you feel like the water evaporating out of the plaster. I'm going to take out this close. Do you have the trash can?
Right behind, in the corner there.
So while his mold is setting up, I'm going to keep working on this part of my waist mold here. And I'm just going to build up the thickness a little bit and try to get it to about an inch or an inch and a half, and then I'll be able to flip it over and take off the clay.
All right. So, I guess now we got to talk about alginate.
Yeah, we could start doing that. We're
All right.
waiting for this dry.
All right.
That sounds good.
Does anybody want to get their handicap?
Sure. That's good.
Okay.
Alright, I knew there was somebody that wanted to.
Okay. Alginate, super safe material.
It was originally used by dentists, right?
Yeah, it's mostly used by dentists. So if you guys have ever had like braces or anything where they take molds in your teeth, alginate is what they use, and it's just like almost like Jell-O. It's based off seaweed, so it's like super. You can eat it if you want to. I don't know why you would ever want to.
At the dentist, it's wintergreen flavor.
Yeah, they do flavor it at the dentist. So super safe to use, not to be confused with any other material. When I was going to school, one of my teachers got in trouble because the parent of one of the students came in and was like, my student tried to cast my hand and I had to go to the hospital, and the student accidentally mixed up alginate and Bondo. So don't mix up alginate with any other material.
Accidentally?
Yeah.
Okay, but they're both kind of pink. No, you should probably use a bigger bucket.
Oh, did you sign it? Yeah, you signed it. The video will be on YouTube next week too.
When you wash that out, you should never wash it out in the sink either.
No, what I like to do is just let it dry, and then I just mush the bucket and it pops right out. If you want your buckets to last a really long time, you can mold release all your buckets before you start using them, and then they just clean out real easy.
Sounds good.
How do you know when you're 1.5 inches above your form there?
Well, you can kind of look at the edge of it, actually. If you try to keep a clean edge, then you should be able to just tell that way.
Are you going to use more plaster?
Yeah, but I'll go between these two buckets.
Okay. Let's see if we can move this guy out of the way. Let's see if I can drop this one.
When you're working with these kind of waste molds, it's really good to try to keep as clean an edge as you can. Instead of just having this edge go crazy everywhere, it's nice to have a clean edge because then when you need to pry it apart later, you can just stick it in a little paddle and wedge it open.
We're going to give these a couple more seconds to dry off before we start using the alginate. Any questions so far?
Have you used that 123D print personally?
I've used 123D Catch and I've used 123D Make. I haven't used their printing, whoever they link with to print.
Okay.
But they're
That's
They're
what we
free
use
programs.
for the CNC piggyback sculpture. What do
I
we
used
call them?
123D Catch for that one, but I divided it up in Rhino. But you can use a similar sort of thing in 123D Make, which had they had that at that time would have made that sculpture quite a bit easier to make.
I'm just wondering
But-
what the sort of fidelity of the detail is at that process. Like, does it come out kind of like a smoothed out version of what you took the photographs of?
No, you would
Kind
hope
of
it would come-
lumpy, actually.
They have a tendency to become like cancered, is what the technical term is. They become cancered objects, so they end up with these like lumps some places. It keeps getting better, like every new version. They're like, it's getting better and better and better. But, and it also depends on like, where you take the photographs. So it's best to do it under like, clouds, but incredibly bright. So like the bright, even light is ideal for it. Heavy shadows will throw everything off. So it's a great, and it's free, it's easy to use. So it's a great program. The simpler the forms, the easier it is for it to understand it. If you're, it won't work for something like a spider web or something, but for something like this would be ideal,
Nothing too glossy, really, because like the highlights on the reflections, I think that's probably what's making it lumpy, because it'll read that
So
as
there's a
being
lot of
higher or lower.
variables in that
Yeah,
process.
yeah.
It's not perfect, but it's pretty good.
Are there any more pro-level versions of that kind of
You can get
software?
photogrammetry. There's not too many more pro levels than that. I mean, you can get 3D scanners, which are
That's the
work a
stuff.
lot better. But even 3D scanners aren't perfect. They deal with you know, a lot of, like voids and objects become a little tricky, or very thin objects become a little tricky. There's a company that makes a fairly inexpensive 3D scanner. It's about $3,000. And that's about the cheapest 3D scanner you can get. And that's Next Engine. But you can get, they have really cool ones. There's also pens you can get that you can connect to a CNC router that you can actually use that to plot the points on a thing. There's a company that creates a wand that you can basically like go over stuff with that scan like in real time. But those things begin at about $50,000. So they're out of most everybody's price range. Yeah.
You used the program and then you said brought in Rhino and put it to the CNC machine?
I think it's, I use for my 3D modeling, I tend to use a program called Rhino, which is a good 3D modeling program for CNC prototyping and CAM and all that stuff. I mean, other programs like Blender work really well, and if you guys, Blender's free and it's an awesome program, so if you wanted to mess around with that, I would just download that.
It's primarily for 3D animation, right?
It is for 3D animation, but you can export an STL, which whenever you're dealing with...
That's a stereography file.
Whenever you're dealing with 3D printing and 3D prototyping, STLs are pretty standard. It's like the JPEG, you know what I mean, for photographs. It's an STL for a 3D model. So you can see Leah's building it up to the point where it's nice and smooth now.
And actually, you know, I wouldn't have to put burlap on this, but I think I want to keep this mold for making a couple of different bear heads, so I am actually going to put a little bit of burlap on there. And then you guys can just see how I do that as well. So I'm going to finish up my plaster on this layer here, and then I'll do burlap as my final layer, and then I'll flip it over.
Burlap in case anything.
Sure. You can use fiberglass also, right?
Yeah,
You can,
burlap's a little easier to work with, you know, it's less.
What is the burlap for?
It's like, yeah. It's kind of like, well, it's a fiber reinforcement, so it acts like rebar inside of it.
I mean, fiberglass is just fine, but then, you know, it tends to get in your skin and just be kind of itchy.
I know.
Yeah.
But actually, when I'm creating the finished product, if I want it to be lightweight and hollow, I will take a fiberglass to reinforce the plaster because it's very strong.
But yeah.
And you can use fiberglass to reinforce lots of things like epoxy resins or water-based aqua resins, which are really nice.
Yeah.
So what do you do with your big head sculpture?
The big head was actually just foam with something called foam coat on top of it.
Oh, okay.
So if I leave this stuff in the bucket, I can just...
Yep, just chop it out.
Peter, do you need another bucket?
What's that?
Do you need another bucket? Clean up. Oh, there, yeah, there's just over here.
White one, I'm using powder coat, and then black one. I never get my shirt
So the bucket's coming out fairly late. You can just let it all dry in there. A little bit. Is this our cleaning water?
Yeah.
There we go. Nothing we've used so far is toxic. Don't reach your hand into something toxic and wash them.
burlap to be in manageable pieces. You don't really need to do much about 1 or 2 layers of this is fine. If you're doing a larger mold, you can use pretty big pieces of burlap actually, and just dip the whole thing in a big bucket of plaster, and then have just one large piece of burlap. But for something like this, I like having smaller pieces that I can kind of stitch together.
Does anybody watch Face Off on Saturday? Yeah. If you want to see people working with molds on a TV show like Face Off on Sci-Fi, they do a lot of special effects makeups. So they make cast. They work a lot with clay, and then they cast it into like rubber or foam and make like masks and things for. They have to create characters for part of the competition, but.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, they show them. Every episode is something about a mold, tension. The mold's not working or whatever. Something that's great drama somehow. My mold's falling apart.
I know.
It's like every single episode.
If I record it, I'll fast forward. Like, really?
I know.
Yeah, they usually explain all the
page is too long.
Yeah, they usually show the process.
Boxes.
Let's take a look at it.
This will depend. We might have to get somebody with a smaller hand.
She volunteered.
Oh, is it not? Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't find a weight on there, so it's like something French.
Generally, the mix ratio of algae to water is going to make that much. You mix 1 part
So it doesn't
alginate to 1
double,
part
it's
water,
kinda-
and it's still the same as the 1 part water. It's if you guys are mixing up. If you guys are working a lot with alginate, it's best to order it through like dental supply companies.
Yeah,
It seems like whenever you order stuff from art supply stores, they jack up the prices.
Even
Is it
more
a-
than dental things?
Yeah. Because, artists have so much money to spend on it. So, you might have to go with a smaller handed person. Sorry.
Mine okay, or you want to give me more?
My fingers are long, but my hands are small. For yours.
Mine's are very big.
I think she probably has smaller hands than you.
Sure.
Sorry.
So you can see what I'm doing here with the burlap to strengthen the mold is I just kind of soak it through with the plaster and lay it on here. I really have to make sure though that I'm pressing down wherever just all over the burlap, because if I have an air bubble at this point, that's going to be a part where it's just really not structural. So especially like around the edges, that's where the air bubbles are going to tend to be.
And the cool thing about plaster is it doesn't have to be like, the product you use on your way to making a sculpture. It can be the end result. So working with plaster and burlap does give you quite tough, a tough material, and it's, if it's held up, it'll last forever.
How different is this than like plaster gauze strips that you can buy?
This is much
similar.
stronger.
It's similar, and it's also cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
So
plaster
generally-
gauze strips, they just have like the powdered plaster already kind of like set into them, and then you just wet them and you put them over a thing.
Which is great for like craft projects, when you're only using like a tiny bit. But when you're doing like a lot of stuff, then this stuff works way better. And the gauze strips use like a I think it's like cheesecloth almost.
That's exactly what it is.
So it's not as tough as the burlap.
My high school art teacher had students make a mold of me with plaster gauze strips. But it sort of fell in on itself a little bit when it was done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what will happen. But this is really going to maintain its form.
Did you like cover it with saran wrap first?
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to close the word.
If you guys ever do cast against a person with plaster, make sure you cover them or release them, because if plaster will stick very well to
all the little hairs, yeah, and and it has a heat reaction too. So especially when it's thicker, it gets pretty hot. So we can
yeah. So if you cast it like, if I were to cast somebody under a block of plaster, I would probably cook that person. So you want to keep it fairly thin. You don't want to go over like a half an inch really if you're doing anything against somebody's skin. But if you're doing anything against somebody's skin, I would recommend using alginate because it is way cool.
Yeah, but it's only really good for small portions like hands, feet, faces. If you want to do like a whole body casting, there's a skin-safe silicone.
Which is ridiculous.
It's very expensive, but
and the same problem does apply, that it can get really stuck in hair.
yeah, so you still have to, use a release. But even just like the Vaseline, just kind of cover yourself in that, and it's fine.
What did George Stiefel do?
I believe he used just plaster and burlap.
Yeah.
So those are all just plaster burlap. Which, I mean, people have been doing that forever, The silicone's only been around, I think, for like less than 10 years, so that's a very new product. But the plaster and burlap works great. It's just,